Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable, carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thank you for joining the conversation today. We're going to wrap up a story we've been covering for several years. As the world confronts the urgent challenge of removing billions of tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, breakthrough innovations will be essential to scale solutions fast enough to meet our global climate goals. One of the most ambitious efforts to catalyze this innovation is the XPRIZE Carbon Removal Competition, a $100 million global challenge funded by the Musk Foundation. And we've been following the Carbon Removal XPRIZE as the more than 1,300 teams from 88 countries competed to deliver a scalable, verifiable carbon removal solution from engineered technologies to nature-based approaches. And today we're rejoined by Nikki Batchelor, who's Executive Director of the XPRIZE Carbon Removal Project, and Michael Leach, Senior Technical Lead for the competition. They've been with us before, as I said, to share updates as the competition unfolded, and now they're back to reflect on what may be one of the most consequential moments in carbon removal innovation to date, the announcement of the grand prize winner and runners-up. And Matty Carbon took home $50 million, the grand prize, and three runners-up, Net Zero, Vaulted Deep, and Undo, received $5 million each. Based in Kenya, Matty Carbon stood out for its enhanced rock weathering strategy, a natural solution which involves applying finely ground volcanic rock to farmland to capture carbon that draws it down into the soil while improving soil health and supporting local farmers. The runners-up also offered diverse solutions from biochar production to underground carbon storage and large-scale mineral spreading. But we're going to dive into what made these teams exceptional and how the XPRIZE helped elevate them, as well as what's next for carbon removal. You can learn more about the winning carbon projects and the XPRIZE programs for other grand challenges at xprize.org. XPRIZE is all one word, no space, no dash, xprize.org. We're going to get to the conversation right after a brief commercial break. Stay tuned, folks. It's going to be an interesting conversation. Welcome back to the show, Nikki and Michael. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Mitch.
Well, you've accomplished something pretty big. You've finished the contest. And before we get to the winners, I want to start by going back to the beginning. How did we get here? What was the motivation for the Carbon X Prize?
Great place to start. So it's been a long road to get to this point. Actually, it's been exactly a decade since XPRIZE started our journey working on climate change and carbon management specifically. We started our efforts there working on how do you take CO2 emissions and turn them into valuable products, trying to focus on where there might be revenue and a market for those things. As the climate crisis really progressed, we started thinking about what's the next big thing, which we started looking at carbon removal and going the next step of new technologies and solutions that could remove CO2 directly from the air and the oceans. So we launched this new prize that was $100 million, the biggest incentive prize in history, to really mobilize the world to start thinking about this challenge. That was 2021 when we made that big splash, and it really did mobilize people. We got over 1,000 folks around the world starting to work on the problem. Some of them, who had been researching it for a while, some of them who were starting businesses for the first time. And then we went through this big judging process to winnow that field down to a top 100, a top 60, a top 20. And then we really worked closely with 20 finalists for the last year to get to this exciting moment we're at now where we have winners.
So, how do you think that process, the design of the process, contributed to the diversity and quality of the solutions that were ultimately selected?
That was always very front and center for us. When we started designing the prize, we wanted it to be about all of the different types of ways you could remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and recognizing there are no silver bullets in climate change. We really need to focus on a portfolio approach where all of these things can scale collectively and get to a place where hopefully we're removing gigatons of CO2 in the coming decades. So we designed the prize to be very solution agnostic. It was open to all different kinds of pathways. We loosely categorized them into four tracks. We called them air, ocean, land, rocks. And so that was kind of an organizing principle to keep, similar solutions next to each other, to look at them side by side with the judges, and to always continue to make sure we were representing a broad group of them.
What I was impressed by is that you ultimately did land on a natural solution with Mati. So why Mati, an African-based carbon sequestration company using rock weathering as a strategy? What set them apart?
The most important part of the competition is that it was a demonstration competition. So teams who were successful in the competition actually had to do carbon removal. The challenge was remove in 12 months, remove 1,000 tons of CDR, which is a kiloton. And the premise of the competition was demonstrate CDR at a kiloton, model cost at megaton, and then show that the solution is scalable at gigaton levels. So really for all of the teams, that was like the focus of the challenge. First and foremost, demonstrate at kiloton. Um, Many of the finalists did this. Mati really excelled across all of the operational criteria, but then they also made a very, very strong case in the other criteria, megaton scale cost and gigaton scale sustainability.
How did they demonstrate cost effectiveness? And I think we understand how permanent this is. It's in the soil. What verifiable impact did they point to confirm their success at the kilotons scale?
Yeah, I mean the name of the game is, like I said, being a demonstration competition, it's one thing just to sort of draw it out on a piece of paper and show off the design and the potential of it. It's another thing to execute in the real world. The reality of enhanced rock weathering in particular is you have to source a lot of rock, you have to crush it up, and you have to get it out into farmers' fields across a very large area. And even at kiloton scale, that's a large operation. And so actually going through the motions of doing all of that over the course of a year, Maddie in particular demonstrated operational sophistication
Mhm.
as well as scientific sophistication in verifying that they were going through those motions in a way that was scientifically rigorous and, can give us confidence that the removals are actually happening.
As you look at the process that they use, have you also calculated the energy and carbon expended to do the rock crushing, to do the logistics and distribution of the material to the farmlands? And does it pencil out as a net win?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is yes. The whole idea of removing CO2 at kiloton scale relies on something called life cycle analysis, which is where you measure and report all of the carbon impacts of your system right from, they call it from cradle to grave, right from the point where materials are being extracted and raw materials are being gathered all the way through to the end of life where, this could be 10 or 100 years from now, what re-emissions might occur over time. And so again, when I talk about sort of the complexity of operating these projects, these demonstrations, it also comes down to the sophistication of the data collection and the ability of a team to really have all of those elements, those fine-tooth details, under control. And that's certainly one of the strongest differentiators in the carbon removal space.
I was really struck by the fact that there wasn't a direct air capture solution amongst the winners. Is that an indication that those technically intensive systems are not at this point really net wins for the environment?
I wouldn't say that they are not net wins. We did have several direct air capture companies amongst the finalists.
Yes.
The challenge really came down to demonstrating that 1,000 tons in the 12 months of the competition. So the competition had a start date and an end date. There was a real deadline. And the reality of direct air capture is that you need to do a lot of building and developing before you can start removing CO2. So if you compare that to a solution that's ERW or biochar where you can sort of grow a demonstration organically. Direct air capture, you kind of have a lot of building and designing and constructing, and then you turn it on and start running. And so, frankly, the direct air capture companies ran out of time. We had a lot of, I would say the direct air capture companies in the finalists are very strong. Most of them have built that kiloton scale system, but didn't operate it long enough to hit the competition target of 1,000 tons.
So the permitting process alone could be a blocker for a company like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Permitting, but it's not just permitting, right? It's supply chains. We had teams that had equipment that was held up at borders. We had teams whose equipment was under construction when a hurricane hit. These are the realities of building out significant projects. So that isn't to say that direct air capture doesn't have potential, but there are barriers to getting it up and running.
So Monty's got some additional co-benefits. For instance, helping smallholder farms in Kenya earn more revenue. And it creates greater food security in those regions because the soil's more productive. How did that factor into the selection of Monty as the winner?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that it's important to talk about all the co-benefits and other things that solutions bring to the communities that they go into. I would say for the purpose of the competition and the way the rules were structured, we were definitely focused first and foremost on carbon removal, trying to make sure that a solution was most effective at that. So that was the primary thing that we were trying to understand and evaluate. But we did have a whole category of evaluation criteria that we call broadly sustainability criteria. And that includes things like the environmental footprint of the solution, the social and human impact on communities where they're going. And we wanted to make sure that any solutions that we were supporting through the prize and ultimately awarding money to were positive on all of those factors as well. So it definitely was, a great mark on their evaluation scorecard, that they were benefiting smallholder farmers and that there were economic incentives for farmers that they were working with, also that their environmental footprint was low because that would have been a mark against them and could have, changed the rankings when we were looking at them against other people. And they're also, very thoughtful about how they work with their local partners and, all of those things make it a more scalable solution as we talk about going from, thousands of tons of removal where we're at now into megatons and gigatons, which the footprint will be much, much larger to reach those scales. So it's important to think about those factors now.
So what is the experience of the farmer? They receive a load of material and spread it. How does this work? Can you give us a sense of the day-to-day operations?
One of the great advantages of a technique like enhanced rock weathering is it really doesn't change the farmer's operations all that much. In North America and in other parts of the world, it's actually very common for farmers to spread rock dust on their field as a means, as a type of fertilizer, really. So that's not commonly deployed in the developing world because farmers can't afford it. So one of the great advantages of enhanced rock weathering, and one of the great potentials of enhanced rock weathering in places like Africa and India, is that the CDR model can actually provide farmers with a service in fertilizing their fields and improving the nutrition of the soil that they wouldn't otherwise be able to afford. In terms of implementing it, it really is a remarkably simple process. You drive a tractor or pull a wagon across the field, and a spinning paddle will fling rock dust all over the ground. It's a very, very simple means of applying material to a field, and it's something that's sort of easy for farmers to do and to understand. And then really from there on, they just do their thing. They farm their fields, they grow their crops, they do the harvest, and the CDR, or you could almost say the carbon harvest, sort of happens in the background. The trick then becomes for Matthew to do the soil sampling and monitoring and like get all the details, but the farmer doesn't really need to be involved in all of that.
Yeah, in fact, I think that the largest implementation of this in North America was the eruption of Mount St. Helens. which created amazingly productive farmland in eastern Washington for decades. So one of the things I was curious about is whether or not the farmers are also benefiting financially from the CO2 drawdown through carbon credit programs or otherwise. Is that one of the components of the MADI program?
Yeah, it depends on how the enhanced rock weathering company like Mati wants to set up their business. There are different models that they might employ. They might want to manage the carbon crediting process themselves, because if that was distributed across thousands of farmers, that would be complex too. But the idea is that the farmers benefit directly through increased yields and then increased sales of their agricultural products. So there is a direct benefit to the farmers in that way. And then the credits might be a whole kind of separate financial structure that's managed in a different way.
So different Lego parts for different
Yeah.
solutions. So how is Mati going to use the $50 million?
Ooh, good question. They're a pretty small but mighty team right now. They've been operating really lean to get to this point and scale as quickly as they can. So I think first they need to hire more staff so that they can expand their operations. They're predominantly working in India right now, as well as Africa, and looking at new locations as well. So they're planning to grow their footprint, recruit more farmers, really just expand what they're doing. They also have a really strong commitment to advancing the research and development of the broader enhanced rock weathering space. And so plan to commit some of their prize winnings actually to moving the space forward and doing research with the leading universities and scientists to make sure that there is more data available for all the enhanced rock weathering companies. And we're kind of moving forward as an industry there with increased confidence in the crediting process and everything like that that we know buyers need on the back end.
There's a lot to dig into beyond this, so let's take a quick commercial break and we'll come back and talk about the runners up. Well, let's get back to the conversation about the XPRIZE carbon removal winners and runners up with Nikki Batchelor, Executive Director of the XPRIZE Carbon Removal Program, and Michael Leach, the Senior Technical Lead. You had to compare at the beginning 1,300 different projects. What were the most challenging aspects of making a decision across such a wide range of technical, economic, and ecological criteria?
You really get to the heart of the competition with that question. I mean, we always knew from the beginning when we started designing that we would be comparing apples to oranges and what would be the best way to look at those solutions side by side. We mentioned earlier some of the criteria, but just to reiterate, the way we did the evaluation, well, I shouldn't say we work with judges. Mike and I don't actually make any of the decisions around the winners. We manage a diverse judging pool of over a dozen judges that are from all over the world, different universities, leading researchers in their fields across all the different areas of carbon removal. So they're the ones doing the reviews and making the official decisions. And we focus on three different categories. The first is operational criteria. The second is cost, and the third is sustainability. So operations is really you have to build and demonstrate that this thing works. We're not an ideas competition. XPRIZE is really about validating that technologies and solutions work at some sort of field pilot scale. And so we required everyone to build an end-to-end solution that removed the CO2 starting from either the air or the ocean all the way through to where it was going to be stored permanently. And we went around and validated all of those with third-party verifiers as well. So that was part of operations. Then when we get into cost, we looked at the modeling of what a solution would cost, not just now today, because we know that things are more expensive now because they're in the very early stages of technology development, but what it would cost at megaton scale, which we start to get into some more standardization and economies of scale. And then ultimately, the sustainability criteria is if you try and blow this all the way up into gigaton levels, what would it look like? What would the land water footprint be? What would the impact on communities be? And so those things you can abstract for each solution to understand kind of what the impact and growth trajectories would be.
Tell us about the runners up. That was Net Zero, Vaulted Deep, and Undo. What set them apart? And was it a really close competition? Did they just lose by a hair? How did that fall out?
The competition was very tight. The quality of the finalists was very impressive, really across the board. It was a really I mean, I'll just say personally, for me, it was a really wonderful year, being able to get to know all of these teams and see what all of them were able to accomplish over the course of the finals in the competition. Like I said previously, and Nikki just mentioned, the first and foremost teams had to demonstrate. So what set Net Zero, Volta Deep, and Undo apart was they stepped over that bar. They did the removals. They made it look easy. We know it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
But the quality of their operations were really excellent. So beyond that, it comes down to, like Nikki said, modeling costs,
Mhm.
measuring sustainability, making the case for gigaton scale CDR is really, really tough. And anytime you start, we ask for teams to demonstrate at a kiloton scale. You have to multiply that by a million to get to gigaton scale. And anytime you start multiplying things by a million, the numbers get really intimidating really fast. There are unavoidable impacts. And so what set these teams apart, all of the winning teams, was for them to be able to make that case that, when you start multiplying by a million, we're not running into significant problems where there's like serious adverse impacts. And that comes back to the question of co-benefits and how these solutions can help their local communities and not hinder their local communities. So that's what really made the winning teams special. The decision about the grand prize winner and the runners up really came down to that scalability question and how confident the judges were that, number one, these solutions could scale to gigaton levels, and then number two, what are the impacts and really the opportunities associated with that level of scale.
Well, so and for these companies, they're doing biochar, subterranean carbon storage, and another rock weathering. Again, and now I understand why these approaches were the most likely to win because of the complexity of building a DAC system. When you look at the set of winners, do you imagine these different approaches being combined in order to reach the billions of tons
Mhm.
of removal that we're talking about needing to do over the course of the next 50 years?
You mentioned the sort of inherent advantages of these solutions, and that's certainly true, and certainly at the scales that we're talking about, deployability, so the ease of deployment, really made a material difference in the way the competition played out. But I also don't want to suggest that these were easy projects to execute. The companies, even at a kiloton scale, each of these teams had to build an organization around them, and it was not only addressing sort of the technical and conceptual challenges, but managing the organizational challenges over the course of a full year. But the inherited advantages make a difference. You look at the teams like Net Zero and Volta Deep, they take biomass that was sort of created by nature. And so they're leveraging photosynthesis, they're leveraging these natural pathways, and then it just becomes a question of how you manage that biomass in a way that results in long-term, net drawdown of CO2. You've got enhanced rock weathering teams that are taking advantage of these natural weathering pathways. And the name of the game is, how do we enhance and accelerate what is otherwise a very slow process? So it really came down to both, having those natural advantages, but then leveraging those with a mature and high quality operation.
Yeah, and I think where I'm actually driving toward is the question of, you talked about earlier, you had to compare apples and oranges, but what we're talking about is an environment in which apples, oranges, pears, or all sorts of different fruits, in this analogy, are going to be grown to create a sustainable carbon neutral society. As you look at what you've learned from the last 4 years of this competition, how do you imagine humanity managing the carbon load in the atmosphere? What's it look like? It's obviously so many different companies, so many different industries potentially being tied into that. Will we ultimately be thinking about the atmospheric CO2 level the way that we think about the temperature in the room and managing it?
I mean, you made a really great point in that there's no silver bullets here. And when we were looking at the finalist teams making the case for gigaton scale CDR, it's really hard. And
Yeah.
we're just talking about getting to 1 gigaton per year, right? We know we're going to need a lot more than that. And so the reality of where we are at as a planet, as humanity, is that we are going to need all of these solutions to succeed to the extent that they can all over the world.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that we've been able to do with this competition is help showcase what carbon dioxide removal looks like. It's much different when you're looking at cartoons or schematics or, talking about things conceptually, versus actually being able to see what are we talking about here? What do the farmers have to do differently? And I'll just plug a docuseries that we've created. You can find it on YouTube, and it showcases all the 20 teams and helps sort of bring to life what CDR looks like in the real world. But the reality is we need all of them to succeed, and not just the winners, not just the 20 finalists, but all 1,300 competitors. There's a lot of different opportunities to remove carbon from the atmosphere, and what solutions work in different regions and different economies and different contexts. It's going to look different, and diversity is good and important.
So how's XPRIZE working with government and investors to spread the word about the viability of these approaches?
Yeah, good question. That really plays into a lot of our what we call impact strategies. So we think about the prize as a platform to really advance and build a market that, we're focusing on for whatever the topic is. And this prize in particular, it was perfectly timed, I think, with the new momentum and interest in building a carbon removal industry. So alongside running this competition where teams are entering and trying to compete with each other and build solutions, we've also been trying to raise the profile of carbon removal globally with policymakers, with communities, through our marketing efforts, just trying to engage with new stakeholder groups to really help people understand that this is real, the solutions exist, they're being built around the world, and they work. Because there are a lot of different myths out there. People think that this is really far off, it's science fiction, we're nowhere near where we need to be, or that just generally solutions don't exist to the climate crisis. And I think one of XPRIZE's main positions and our role kind of in this ecosystem is to be, a bit more hopeful and optimistic, to show people that there are solutions that can help move the needle on a lot of the world's biggest challenges, climate being one of the biggest problems of our time. So we're trying to get the word out, about how much progress is being made behind the scenes by innovators, entrepreneurs. Mike mentioned that docu-series. That's a helpful tool to just see it running and operating. Not everybody's going to be able to go visit a CDR project in their backyard, but it would be helpful for more people to understand that it's maybe not as intimidating as it sounds like. It's really, in a lot of cases, visiting farms and things that people are familiar with. It's not always like a giant building with fans, but even that is not scary once you see it and you're like, oh, this is really cool and exciting that you can do that with technology, and the environmental footprints don't always have to be so significant. So that is part of, our messaging and advocacy work on the side for sure.
What does the XPRIZE Carbon Removal Organization do next? And what's the plan to encourage continued connection and innovation?
Yeah, so we'll definitely be active in the carbon removal community for the foreseeable future, trying to continue supporting the winners, the finalists, and all of the teams to amplify their work, get them on more stages, out in front of more audiences so people can learn about that. So that's a big focus for us, having a leading role in all the big climate convenings like Climate Weeks and COP and things like that. We're also trying to continue building more demand in the space. So we have a challenge called the Global 1000 CDR Challenge, which is really a call to action for the world's 1,000 largest companies to buy 1,000 tons of carbon removal this year, which is not a large amount at all. It's kind of trying to get more people to dip their toe in and start to build this into their sustainability and net zero strategies. So we're convening buyers in geographies around the world to help facilitate those discussions, and continuing to support relationships with with investors and organize events in that space too. So we'll be working carbon removal, but then we'll also, as XPRIZE and our climate and energy practice, we're starting to look at what are the next big challenges? What are the things that a prize could be helpful at? And so we're going to start entering a new cycle of designing the next phase of prizes. And we're looking at a few areas that we've kind of identified as hotspots that are ripe for a prize. Methane removal is one of them. So looking at how we do something similar to what we did with carbon removal for methane. What is the other side of kind of this carbon markets coin is really more on the nature-based side of things. So we didn't focus as much on that with this prize, but what would it be like to try and improve quality and increase trust in the crediting market around, forestry projects and ecosystem restoration, and could a prize be useful there? And then, if those things aren't successful too, we're all going to need to start thinking more about adaptation and resilience, and what does it look like to live in a warming world, and how do we be more, preventative and improve, our planning process and have better, faster responses to the disasters that do happen. So those are some of the areas that are high on the list right now for us.
Given what we know from the contest and what you know from your experience talking about this all over the world, where will carbon removal be in a decade? Are we going to be at the gigaton scale? How much momentum do you foresee? Paint a picture.
I'll just step back for a second and say personally, it's very nice to bring a project to a close. We've been working hard in this area for a few years, and it's very satisfying to sort of see the fruits of our labor in having awarded this X Prize. But this isn't a mission accomplished moment. Emissions continue to go up. The greenhouse gases remain humanity's grandest challenge. And so it's really important to, number one, recognize innovation and recognize high quality performance. And that's something that we've really been focused on doing, in awarding this prize. I think we've done a good job of that. But we can't take our eye off the ball. We have a long way to go in terms of deployment. And so, Nikki mentioned all of the great impact programs that we've been working on. Nikki also mentioned the areas of interest that we're looking at XPRIZE in terms of launching new challenges. It's all, for us, it's all about supporting innovation, supporting innovators and development of new technologies, and then supporting deployment of those technologies. And so that's where that's really sort of like at a high level what we hope to achieve over the next decade. The proof is going to be in the pudding. Are we removing carbon at gigaton scale in 10 years? Yes or no? And I hope the answer is yes. I also hope that we are going to see emissions come down to the point where the atmosphere and humanity is left in a healthier place.
Absolutely. I hope that happens as well. What can people who are listening right now do to drive adoption or awareness of carbon removal? We all want this to happen. How can we help you do it?
I mean, for me, learn more about carbon removal, learn more about not just carbon removal, but about emissions reduction in general. There's a whole ecosystem of brand new companies that are looking for talent. Deploying carbon removal is going to take a global workforce. And, it's been really cool actually to see new graduates come into the carbon removal field and getting their first jobs at a carbon removal company. It's not just for kids either. They need experience. We need engineers, we need tradesmen, we need business people, we need marketing people. So, I mean, really, if you're looking to contribute to the carbon management or greenhouse gas management industry, consider taking a job in greenhouse gas management. There's a lot of really great opportunities, and scaling CDR, scaling greenhouse gas management, scaling methane removal, is really about bringing people to the cause and deploying that time and effort towards the area. So that's the number one for me.
Yeah, those are all great calls to action. I think, if you're not ready to take a job in this space, maybe you really just go learn if there's a project in your community, understand it, support it. At the most fundamental level, we know that new things don't happen in society without public support. So we need to get to a place where normal people and communities are comfortable with this intervention and we understand that it's necessary and people just kind of have more of an acceptance level with it, that will help move the needle with policymakers who are making decisions about, moving new regulations forward in any jurisdiction around the world.
It is a human grand challenge that we face, but congratulations on completing this important step.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mitch.
You've been listening to a conversation about the XPRIZE carbon removal winning team, Mati Carbon, and the runners-up, Net Zero, Vaulted Deep, and Undo, with Nikki Batchelor and Michael Leach, who led the program. You can learn more about the XPRIZE carbon removal and other grand challenges at xprize.org. XPRIZE is all one word, no space, no dash. xprize.org, and do check out the article that accompanies this podcast to find a link to the XPRIZE carbon removal channel on YouTube, where the docuseries they described about the project and the winners is available. There's a lot of fascinating viewing there, folks. If you don't know much about carbon removal, I do urge you to visit the channel, because as we heard, there are many ways to draw down atmospheric carbon, from natural solutions like enhanced rock weathering and biochar enhancement of agricultural soil, to direct air capture and underground carbon sequestration. We're going to need all those techniques deployed globally and more to meet the challenge of reversing climate change. But jumpstarting an industry isn't easy. Grand challenge programs like the nonprofit XPRIZE can de-risk the initial steps in launching novel sectors like this, but those early investments need follow-through in the form of private capital, government support, and favorable regulations, as well as the commitment of peoples around the world to learn about and work in the carbon capture and sequestration industries. The kiloton scale projects today have to scale up to the millions of tons sequestered rapidly, if only to keep up with our continually rising emissions. Despite predictions that it was going to stop and reverse, emissions levels have continued to rise. Last year, in 2024, humans sent another 41.6 billion tons of planet-warming CO2 into the atmosphere, and that's on top of the approximately 1.5 trillion tons emitted since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. We've dug ourselves into a climate hole, and we must begin a coordinated response to avoid bequeathing future generations an environment too warm for human life. Stopping new emissions by reducing or eliminating the carbon footprint of manufacturing, transportation, and the built environment are important complementary steps to the carbon capture industry. Carbon capture cannot simply serve as an offset for new emissions. We've already set the thermostat too high to sustain our way of life and need to commit to draw down 2 to 10 times more emissions annually than society produces. The combination of lowered emissions and carbon sequestration will put us on a slow path to environmental recovery. The fast track to CO2 levels that we evolved in, which were about 270 parts per million compared to today's 427 parts per million, could be spurred by this XPRIZE if all of us follow through. So take the time to learn about and follow the development of the carbon capture industry and practice carbon reduction in your daily life. The first step is awareness about the emissions inherent in the products that we use in our way of living. So get involved and get active. And of course, we're going to continue to track the carbon removal movement here on the show. Stay tuned. And would you do me a favor? Please share this or another of the more than 500 episodes of Sustainability in Your Ear with a friend right now. Or take a moment to write a review of the show on your favorite podcast platform. It will help your neighbors find us. You folks are the amplifiers that can spread more ideas to create less waste. So please tell your friends, family, and coworkers that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or whatever purveyor of podcast goodness they prefer. Thank you for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.